When should an adaptation try to build on the source material, and when should it get out of the way and let the source material shine through? Well, episode 21 of Dungeon Meshi answers just that question. It's very plot and dialogue driven, with relatively little animation juice for me to slurp up and spit back in your faces, but that's not to say that the trigger animators didn't come through with a little bit of tasteful flair in certain moments. So let's break down the animation and storytelling and compare it to the manga to see what adaptation decisions have been made, with particular emphasis on character designs and world building. This one adapts the exquisitely named
Chapter 45. Egg.
and also Chapter 46. And it's directed by Ai Ikeda, with storyboards by Ryutaro Suzuki. This episode once again shows the difference in screen time required for dialogue versus action scenes, because despite adapting the same amount of material as usual, there are some significant cuts for time, at least in the first half. There's a very brief missing scene between these two, where in the manga we get a glimpse of the canary's effect on the town itself, with the townsfolk murmuring hushed rumors about their brutality. And one more that's a shame to skip. Remember that bell that Toshiro gave Laios before departing to the surface? Well, Laios apparently just tossed it loose into his backpack, so it's been rolling around ringing non-stop as he walks this entire time. The much foreshadowed canaries have arrived from far-off lands, and with them, a new character for everyone to obsess over and or mistakenly think is a woman. I told you the gender ambiguity would only get more powerful as time went on. They've basically adapted this panel one for one to this shot, and it's a good thing they did because it really speaks to how mangaka Ryoko Kui's character design and storytelling work hand in hand. Looking at this single tableau, you're introduced to 6 new characters all at once, all of the same fantasy race no less, and not only can you get a sense of each of their personalities from their vastly different character designs, expressions, and the way they carry themselves, you can also tell exactly what's been going on in this scene before you so rudely barged in. These lot are really a masterclass in character design. They all very clearly exhibit their sprightly elven features while still being easily distinguishable for their individual characteristics that connect closely to their character dynamics, and all this without using the crutch of just giving them different wacky hair colors. This one's serious, this one's bored, this one's uncomfortably sexy, this one's just a silly little guy. And I mean that in the gender neutral sense. She's a woman. I know it's hard to tell. And these two are both wearing the default canary uniform, but clearly for very different reasons. This one because she's a quivering, anxious little goody two-shoes, and this one because he just cannot give a shit about expressing himself through clothing. And every single detail tells a story, from the overturned chalice to the crumpled papers to the disheveled hapless island lord and furious Mr. Tansu. I love all the little descriptions of the party members here, and then just Senshi? We get to learn more about Kabru's backstory and motivations, why he's so intent on controlling what happens to the dungeon, and it seems some of Laios and Senshi's philosophy has already rubbed off a bit on him, because he uses a nutrition metaphor to describe what he thinks needs to be done with the dungeon. It's a small detail, but I appreciate this bit of character acting in the bored little messenger fairy in the background of this shot who gets summoned only to sit around and wait for orders. Particularly the way she eases out as she stretches upwards. Each frame is spaced a little closer together the closer to the top of the screen she gets, and the more tension is built up in the fingers. Then as she breaks that tension, there's a big jump from this frame to this one, and it's the contrast in that frame spacing that makes this motion feel so appealing to the eye. Also, a weird little detail, there are a couple different types of smears and doubling going on here, but this is one that I haven't seen much. In this frame, she starts flapping her wings again after stopping to stretch, and it looks like the coloring layer actually becomes disconnected from the line art to create this double effect. This is just conjecture, and I could be wrong, but my best guess is that this wasn't present in the key animation, but somewhere later in the process, someone decided that this doubling effect should be here and essentially fixed it in post. Ah, she's dead. One of my favorite details in the cooking scene since episode 1 has been the way Senshi's tools subtly move around under his hands as he uses them. And this floating pot that rotates toward and away from the camera, lagging 3 to 4 frames behind his hand as he stirs, is another great example of that. And I don't know if this is an inaccuracy or just a testament to Senshi's god-tier cooking ability, but there ain't no way that hollandaise sauce is gonna come together that nicely with such gentle stirring with a spatula instead of a whisk, no no less. Editing John here, I'd like to rescind this statement because I made Eggs Benedict and tried to mess up the sauce intentionally for this bit, and maybe it's Senshi's influence, but I couldn't even do it. I mean, this isn't perfect, but it certainly didn't break the way I wanted it to. Laios has apparently been ignoring this ghost for about 9 episodes now, and if you look back at these scenes, this one in particular, he is indeed sort of staring off into space here. This show really bills itself as a cozy little episodic cooking adventure, but it turns out that there are so many little details and hints like this that it rewards you for paying attention to. Don't get me wrong, this is great. I love the rotation, but they could have done this better. I think these panels, reminiscent of Chapter 1, are a great time to look back and see how far Ryoko Kui's art has come since the start of the series, particularly regarding Laios and his Rogaine glow-up. And this is one of the first of her many stunning full-page spreads. It definitely loses some of its grandeur without the sharp contrast and detailed penwork, so go read it. In fact, much of this chapter is made up of giant frames that take up a quarter, half, or even a whole page, really letting you take in all the scenery in this strange, physics-defying land that almost feels too good to be true. Like this next one of the unicorn towering over Laios with its trimmed horn that gives it a very livestock-type steeze, which, and I didn't notice this until watching it again, but it is like that in the show too. They just cut away the moment it's fully on screen, which is a little strange. This is another one of my favorite panels, this time a tiny one, and I love how the animators have made Laios sort of hover insanely in the air between each step for a full 5 frames like he's in a Rankin Bass cartoon, putting one foot in front of the other. Here's your weekly moment of smear frame excellence, and Laios tragically gets rejected by the newly domesticated Izutsumi. And there's a lot of emphasis on hands in this episode, and the details in the way the skin folds around the knuckles in close-up. This is a good example of it, and so is this cut, a little earlier, of him resting his hand on the Minotaur's snout. But the best example comes a few seconds later when Marcel tries to sense the magical aura in this place. This is a moment where reference footage was clearly instrumental in making this look so lifelike, to the point that it almost looks rotoscoped if you don't look too closely at lines like this one, at the heel of her palm that morphs in a kind of unrealistic way. But inconsistencies like that don't end up mattering all that much because the fundamental form and movement of the hand feels so consistent and real. Prime droopy ear moments from Marcel in this episode. This is just one of many. And finally, with the revelation of this classic fantasy-style prophecy, we get an answer to why there's been so much prominent lion imagery throughout the dungeon. And so much has led up to this moment, going all the way back to episode 4 when, confronted by the orcs, Laios swore to think more deeply about his role within the dungeon and what he would do if he ever came to rule it, even to the moment he picked up Kensuke in episode 3. And the dungeon that initially just felt like an excuse for a Dungeons & Dragons type setting just keeps getting deeper and more fleshed out. An ancient kingdom frozen in time by one person corrupted by immense power, a guardian deity chained somewhere in the depths. And in the middle of that, we get these goofsters apologizing for their outdated fashion sense before immediately cutting to Marcel absolutely tearing up the runway in an avant-garde dress that would make Björk and her pet swan weep tears of joy.
My friend made it.
Here, Chilchuk freezes in the middle of throwing a chalice at Laios, but in this panel, he's just dishing out a good old-fashioned beatdown. And of course, here's your obligatory Senshi fan service. Just wait till you see the cover of next chapter. I know this one ended up kind of just being an ad for the manga, but that's only because in dialogue and plot-heavy episodes like this one, the source material really shines through and speaks for itself. And this is a reminder of how great the core of this story is. I mean, it's good. You should read it. I'll catch you next time, probably, same place, to break down next week's episode, so consider subscribing if that's something you're interested in. And thank you to all my supporters on Patreon who are helping prevent me from starving to death. Leia Pico, Mamori, Scrubbin, KDL, Siege Weasel, Retrohime, Serial Isle, Nutaf, Patrick Davison, Arborix, Lisette MT, Jun, Dr. Yolo McSwag, Grav G, Squid Goo, Achu, Austin and Shoji, Julian Francisco, Joe, Jalian Daku Gamboa, and Alex Cervantes, as well as all the other names you're seeing on the screen right now. And thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.